Okay, let's get going here today. Welcome, FlightCrit Friday. We're talking about safety. My name is Sean. I'm your host, and I run the website FlightCrit.com. And if this is just your first time tuning into the show, I want to welcome you and encourage you to head on over to FlightCrit.com and check out the previous broadcast. We are going over the flight paramedic certification exam, and I'm taking you through each category of the flight paramedic certification exam and getting you ready to pass your FPC. I'm giving you the top tips that you need to know from each category, each of the 14 categories that are on the exam. And with this, you should be pretty well ready to take your exam. Just as a disclaimer, this does not cover everything, but these are the major points that you need to know for the exam. If you have not yet shared the show with your friends and colleagues, I please encourage you to do so. You can come on over to FlightCrit.com and watch all the episodes. You can come here to the Google Plus page, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can sign up for my channel. And I also have a Facebook group that you can join over at facebook.com/FlightCrit. I also do weekly broadcasts, sometimes more regularly on Periscope, which is an app that you can download for your iOS device as well as your Android device. It is an app that's created by Twitter. You can find me there at FlightCrit, and you can follow me on Twitter at FlightCrit, where I share latest and greatest things that I'm doing in the air medical transport community. I've got a new video that I'm going to be releasing here soon, which is all about setting up the LTV 1200, but specifically going over how to configure it for oxygen conservation mode. And I'm going to be showing you exactly how that has a profound effect on your oxygen consumption. All right. You're going to see, we may run into a little bit of bumps along the way, but I do want to ask you to send me a tweet if you're on Twitter, or come on over to the Facebook page and leave me a message after this broadcast. I am using a new tool called Doceri, which will allow me to share with you kind of a virtual whiteboard, and I'm going to do some drawings on that. I think it's going to work well, but I want you to let me know what you think. Okay, so getting started. If you have not already watched part 1 of this series or of this episode, please go on over to FlightCrit.com. At the top of the page, click on FlightCrit Friday and scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you will find the part 1 of this episode, which is safety. Last week, we finished off talking about safety around the aircraft. We talked about safety zones around the aircraft, generally staying in view of your pilot, and kind of the what is a safe area to operate around the aircraft. Basically, front of the aircraft back to the 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock position. And we talked about a brief caveat to that, which is some of the aircraft that have rear loading compartments, or patient compartments. Let me go ahead and bring up the study guide. If you have not already downloaded the study guide for this section, you can do that over at FlightCrit as well. So let me go ahead and bring this up, and here we go. Now you should have the whoops, excuse me. You bring this back up, and you should have the study guide in front of you. For those of you that do not have it. All right. So as we talked about last week, generally in view of the pilot front to 9 and front to 3 o'clock position, it's essential to let the pilot in charge of the PIC know that you're moving around the aircraft. Today, we're going to continue with that theme, and we're going to cover ensuring safety, kind of elaborate on ensuring safety around the aircraft. And this applies mostly to when you are on the scene of a flight or doing a scene flight, and you are moving patients to and from the aircraft. I guess it would be applicable anytime you are doing a hot load, which in some instances, you may be doing a hot load if you are picking up a STEMI patient, or you are picking up a stroke alert or sepsis alert or something like that that's time critical. You might still be doing a hot load when you're at the scene, when you're at a hospital. But primarily, this is when operating around the aircraft on like a trauma scene. Case in point are a few things to keep in mind. Never hold anything above your head while working around the aircraft while the aircraft is running. That should be pretty obvious, but you just don't want to get anything up into the rotor system. And the more you work around different aircraft, the more you'll realize that some aircraft, the rotor system is much lower, whereas others, it's much higher. Things like holding IV bags up, IV poles. If you are moving a patient to the aircraft that has multiple pumps that are on a pump pole, anything like that, that could be a hazard. You want to make sure that you don't have anything held up above your head. As we talked about before, never approach the tail rotor. That's under any circumstances when the aircraft is running. It doesn't matter if it's an enclosed tail rotor system like a Fenestron on some of the Eurocopters, or if it's an open tail rotor system. Just never approach the tail rotor. Loose gear is a pretty easy thing to overlook, and yet can be very important, or is very important. And when we talk loose gear, what we're talking about are things like a baseball cap that somebody on the scene might be wearing, a sheet that has been draped over the patient but is not secured underneath any seat belts. Paper, the packaging from bandages or from ET tubes or anything like that that could blow up into the rotor system or get sucked up into the air intake. You want to make sure that that stuff is been removed from the patient and is disposed of before you approach the aircraft, or before you have your helpers approach the aircraft. We do a FOD walk, like I talked about previously, walking around the aircraft looking for foreign objects and debris. Generally, that should be done by your the LZ command or anybody that's at the scene before you come in and land. And that's just a real good thing to remind your ground crew to do before you approach, especially if you're in a place where you can talk to them well in advance. Asking them to do a FOD walk is important, and it's very helpful. When you are operating around the aircraft at like a helipad, doing an IFT, interfacility transfer, or even if you're just at your base, it's good to do a walk around and look for any debris that might become a hazard, float up into the rotor system of the air intake before actually launching on your flight. Okay. Before actually getting into the aircraft and lifting from the scene, you want to do a look around, make sure that all seatbelts there aren't any seatbelts hanging out of the doors, and that's particularly important if you are on if you're on the scene. Say you fly in a helicopter and one person sits, co-pilot seat, and that person gets out at the scene and goes and treats the patient, and now they're climbing into the back of the aircraft. So for instance, the aircraft that I'm flying in right now, we fly in a Augusta Westland 109. Same goes for EC-135s, which is what I previously flew in, 145s, 427s. Any of the larger aircraft are going to be that way. There's a good chance that as flight crew member, you're going to be sitting co-pilot seat on the way to the scene, and you will then be getting out of the co-pilot seat and then treating your patient and then climbing into the back of the aircraft to take care of your patient. So in those instances, you want to make sure that left co-pilot seatbelt is not hanging out. So I use that as an example because that happened to me. But really, what we're talking about is this: you want to make sure that there's nothing hanging out of the aircraft. Okay, here's the first time I'm going to try and pull up this whiteboard and see if this is going to work for everybody, because we're going to talk about tail guards and fire guards, and I can't recall if we talked about that previously, but it's worth mentioning again. So with that, let me bring up my desktop. And we're going to start the desktop share, and I'm going to switch on over to my whiteboard. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. If not, I will include this on the replay. And so if you don't see this, then my apologies, and we will get that taken care of. But okay, so we're going to just a real rudimentary helicopter. Okay, so here's your helicopter. Tail rotor guard. If your tail rotor is on the co-pilot side of the aircraft, like it is in this case, okay, then generally tail rotor is going to stand in this position, or tail rotor guard. And imagine you've got your rotor systems spinning out here. Okay, so you are standing outside the rotor, the main rotor disc, and you position yourself on the co-pilot side so that the pilot can see you. He's able to see you here. You're able to see him, and as well as you're able to see the tail rotor. And the purpose of this is so that you can ensure that nobody is approaching the tail rotor system. Now, this is primarily used when you are on the scene of like a scene call, and you do not have trained personnel to keep an eye on the aircraft or the tail of the aircraft. Remember, the pilot can't see back there, so he doesn't know what's going on. So it's just an added level of safety. Now, if you have firefighters or EMS personnel that you work with on a regular basis that are well versed in working around aircraft, and you've trained with them, and you can assign one of them to keep an eye on the tail rotor and post tail rotor guard, then that's just fine. Otherwise, if you need both crew members at the aircraft, at the patient, and you don't have anybody to watch that tail rotor, you need to be shutting down the aircraft to just make sure that everything is safe. Okay, back this up a little bit. Okay, same aircraft, except in this case, let's see. Yeah, your tail rotor is over here. Of course, same disc. You're just going to position up here at the 1 o'clock. Same rules apply. You can watch the tail rotor. You can see the pilot. The pilot can see you. Okay? All right. Next, we're going to talk about fire guard. Fire guard is generally is something it's handled by the crew members. And what this is just simply both crew members standing on either side of the aircraft, watching the aft of the aircraft to make sure during the startup, this is during startup, okay, to make sure that there aren't any hot starts, what we call a hot start or a flame out of the engines. Okay, what you might see during startup, especially at night, is there might be a little blue flame out the back of the aircraft, and that's just unburned fuel that's sitting in the exhaust manifold that just ignites and kind of blows out the end. A little bit of smoke, not a big deal. What you're looking for are long sustained flames out the back of the exhaust manifold. That's a problem. You need to alert the pilot to. Other things that you might be looking out for is, Joe Schmo that's over here that's like, oh, cool, helicopter, and he's just walking towards the helicopter, and he doesn't really know what's going on. So you know that way you can alert the pilot, hey, don't start up or shut down real quick, or you can you know, holler at this individual and get them to stand back, okay, and let them know it's not safe. So that's fire guard. Okay, hopefully that's clear, and we will move on. All right. Isn't that crazy? Okay, we're back. So I sure hope you got that. If not, shoot me a message and we'll definitely address that. Okay, let's just make sure that I covered everything. We covered fire guard during startup and tail guard during scene or anytime the aircraft is running, and assures safety for everyone around. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Again, safety around the aircraft generally when you're on the scene of an aircraft, when we're on a scene, or if you're at an improved helipad, you may have a ambulance that's bringing you a patient, and you just want to make sure that you keep that ambulance or any other vehicles at least 50 feet away from the aircraft. Safety in the aircraft, and this is securing the patient. This is a subcategory within this main topic. Securing the patient, and I have gotten questions about this, so we'll talk about it. 5-point harness. Generally, our patients are on sleds. We need to be using all of the straps, and generally that involves one strap across their waist, one strap across their midsection, and then a 3-point harness that comes over their shoulders. Shoulder straps, buckle in the front, and that's going to keep them the most safe in the aircraft. If you have a patient that is too small to fit in the aircraft, a couple options. Actually, one option is what's called a PD mate, and it is a soft, foldable, basically car seat for a child or infant that can be strapped to your sled, and then they can be secured inside the PD mate for transport. That, as far as I know, is the only approved method for transporting a pediatric or infant or small child, I guess, if you will, in a helicopter. There are FAA approved car seats that if the parent happens to be there and they are able to provide that, then that should be suitable as well. What you don't want to do is transport a child in a car seat that has been involved in an accident. You don't know the structural integrity of that car seat, and so it could be damaged. And in the event of an emergency, crash landing or hard landing, that seat can fail. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about crew resource management, which is also included on the in the category, and I've gotten many questions about that. Crew resource management is a term that comes from the commercial aviation industry, and it's been applied to the air medical community, and you'll hear it referred to as AMRAM, or Air Medical Resource Management. And that's more likely that's what you'll see on your exam is Air Medical Resource Management, or AMRAM. And you'll hear people talk about that. And essentially what AMRAM is it's a concept that everyone works together for the safety of the flight and for the safety of the crew. This came out of a number of incidences that happened in the commercial aviation industry where there were catastrophic accidents. And after going back and listening to the recordings from the black box, what they realized is that there was a lead pilot that was basically calling all the shots, and he became task saturated and wasn't listening to the other crew members within the cockpit who were warning him of a problem, and consequently there was a crash and lots of people died. And that's where crew resource management came from. It's this idea that everybody in the cockpit is empowered and expected to speak up and get the attention of the whole team in the event that something dangerous is happening. We have a term in the air medical industry called 3 to go or 1 to say no. And essentially what that means is, you typically have a pilot, you have 2 crew members, and it only takes one of those individuals to say, I'm not comfortable with taking this flight or with continuing this flight or whatever it is that you're doing. And you abort and you deal with the situation, whether that means just simply aborting the flight and returning to base, or aborting the flight, stopping what stopping whatever it is you happen to be doing at the time, and making sure that everything is safe, and then reevaluating. And then the 3 to go is all 3 crew members or 4 crew members, or however many there may be on the aircraft, must be on board with the plan. Okay, so 3 to go and 1 to say no. Generally, it's always the lowest comfort level in the aircraft. Now, it's always the lowest comfort in the aircraft. There may be times when there is one individual who's brand new and is still getting used to what is normal, and that individual may be uncomfortable, and that individual is absolutely entitled to speak up and say, I'm not comfortable here, let's address this. Now, what may happen is the pilot or the other crew member may say, let me explain to you why this is normal, and hopefully alleviate their concerns. But if their concerns continue, or if it's an immediate safety risk or whatever, no questions asked, you abort the flight, you abort whatever you're doing, and you get to a safe position, and then you can talk about it. And maybe even after the fact, during the post-mission debrief, you realize that it was really not a big deal, but and there was no real reason to abort the flight. But nevertheless, it's always the lowest comfort level in the aircraft, and it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay. So as I briefly touched on, post-mission debrief, there should be some form of debrief after every mission, and it could be as formal as sitting down, putting things on paper if it was a big incident or something gnarly happened, or it could be as simple as, hey, how'd that flight go for you? I thought it went well. I don't have any concerns. Nothing to debrief. And then that in and of itself is the debrief. Okay. Great. The next thing we're going to talk about is the flight mission safety discussions, or the go, no go. And I already kind of touched on that briefly, and that kind of tags on the 3 to go, 1 to say no discussion. But generally speaking, before a flight is accepted, the pilot will do a weather check and determine whether the weather itself is safe to accept the mission. Okay. The pilots are not allowed to receive any kind of patient information. And I'll give you an example. Your dispatch center talks to the pilot, says, hey, we've got this mission for you. Can you accept it? The pilot says, well, the weather's a little bit sketchy. I'm exactly safe. The dispatch center says, hey, this is a 3-year-old child that is intubated and is really critical, and they really need to get to the pediatric trauma center. You sure you can't take this? And the pilot goes, oh my God, it's a 3-year-old? Yeah, we'll give it a shot. And they take off and they fly into the weather that he already knew was there. And now you have yourself unsafe situation. So pilots are not allowed to be briefed of the patient information when they make their pre-flight analysis. Okay. Likewise, the crew members are not allowed to be in the pilot's office, giving them any kind of pressure to take a flight. As crew members, we always want to fly generally. And so there's no pressure to fly. And if at any time during the flight there is some concern, like we talked about before, 3 to go and 1 to say no, some general terms that you will hear used is, abort, this is stupid, I'm uncomfortable. Okay, those are some really key terms that will be used in the air medical environment. This is stupid, I'm uncomfortable, stop, 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 abort, go around. These are all terms that you will hear used to get the pilot's attention and let them know that, hey, we need to stop what we're doing and come up with a new plan or end this altogether. All right. Next up is responses to in-flight emergencies. And the first one we're going to talk about is fire in the aircraft. Engine fires are rare, but they do happen. In the event of an engine fire, what will happen is the PIC or the pilot will secure that engine and declare an in-flight emergency. The mission will be aborted, and they will take appropriate actions to get the aircraft to the ground. Now, what those actions involve will depend on whether you are flying in a twin engine or a single engine aircraft. Twin engine aircrafts are generally capable of continuing a flight. They can continue to stay in the air in the event that one engine must be shut down. But in the case of a engine fire, the pilot will get to the ground as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, and address the emergency once on the ground. Most aircraft do have an onboard extinguisher, fire extinguishers built into the engine system, and depending on the type of alarms that the pilot gets, those can be deployed to try and extinguish the fire. Cabin fires are a little more of a concern. If there happens to be a fire within the cabin, the first thing that you want to let the pilot know that there's a fire or there's a smell of fire, I got smoke or anything like that. The pilot will immediately start to head for the ground and get on the ground as fast as possible. It's generally best to try and fight the fire on the ground. However, depending on the circumstances, you may be forced to try and fight the fire in the air. Should that become necessary, there are a few particular things to be aware of. The fire extinguishers within the aircraft are halon extinguishers. And halon is a chemical that displaces oxygen. And so, of course, you can, if you think about that, if you're displacing oxygen within the cabin, that's also a risk to the crew members. So be aware that before you use that extinguisher, you're going to need to consider ventilating the aircraft as well. So opening the sliding doors, opening windows, or whatever you need to do in order to make sure that you don't suffocate the crew. You want to ensure that you're securing the oxygen, any supplemental oxygen, immediately, and generally that valve is up near the pilot. He can just close that valve and it'll shut down the oxygen to the entire aircraft. Of course, you don't want to have oxygen fire mixing, and that can cause a real big problem. Then you're going to get on the ground. Once you're on the ground, then you can try to fight the fire depending on the size. If it's a big fire, don't worry about it. Get you, your crew, the patient out of the aircraft and let the aircraft burn. But if it's small enough, absolutely grab your extinguishers and try to fight the fire. If you happen to be at an airport, of course, there are larger fire extinguishers at every airport. And if you're at a real large airport, they will regularly have an aircraft fire and rescue squad that can be called out. Okay, emergency egress. There are generally, well, when talking about emergency egress, you want to think of your primary and secondary egress. If you are, I'm going to switch over here to come back to the my little whiteboard here, and all right. Again, I sure hope that this works. Okay, so here's your aircraft again. And this is just the body of the aircraft. Here's the tail. Okay, so pilot's up here. Can't really draw on the small screen. And, imagine that you're sitting in the back of the aircraft. So, maybe one of you is sitting here and the other one is sitting here, facing that way and facing this way. Okay, so primary egress is generally out. So if this is your configuration, primary egress is going to be out this door here. Okay, secondary egress will be out this door. Okay, so being aware of your primary and secondary egress. Now for pilot, generally his primary egress is going to be out this door here. His secondary egress might be climbing over the console and going out this door here. If you're in a slightly different configured aircraft, if you have a seat here and a seat here, and say the patient's here, this person's primary egress is this way, their secondary egress is out this way, and this person's primary is here and secondary is out that way. Okay, just keeping in mind that you always have several different ways to egress the aircraft. Now, imagine you're looking inside. You're inside the aircraft. You're looking outside. You got trees that are going by, and hopefully the trees aren't this close. Okay, but this is pretty standard on the inside of most aircraft. Around the window, there is a rubber gasket, and generally at the top of the top of the window, you will find a little tab. Generally, it's red. Okay, if you pull this tab, it pulls out this rubber gasket, and then on the corners of the windows, it'll say push, and you can just pull that rubber gasket, and then you can push the window right out, and that will get you out of the aircraft, out that window, if the door happens to be jammed. Most likely, if you have a hard landing, there's going to be twisting of the frame, and you may not be able to actually get out of the door. Okay, going back to the main screen here. Okay, so that's a little bit about egress. There are some strategies that you want to consider when you are when you anticipate having to egress the aircraft. If you've made a hard landing or an actual crash landing, you always want to wait for all violent movement to stop, just like you hear when you're flying in a commercial airline. You want to wait for all violent movement to stop before trying to exit the aircraft. You want to wait for the rotor blades to stop. They will most likely be still spinning. Of course, most likely the main part of the blade will have broken off, and you'll have a short, jagged piece that's still rotating. You want to look outside the aircraft for any hazards, and decide whether your primary or secondary egress is a safe egress direction based on hazards. If you happen to fly in an area that is over water, if you're flying over water, there are additional safety precautions that must be employed depending on how long you will be traveling over water. Flight crew members may be required to wear life jackets and have additional safety gear. Should you have a crash landing in the water, it's very important that you wait again for all movement to stop. But the aircraft, because of the main rotor system, they will invert and they will roll over onto their top. And so you will be upside down, strapped into your buckle. During the pre-crash moments, it's very important. What you want to do is you want to identify where your primary egress is, where your secondary egress is, and then a good rule is to, as you're assuming that crash position, and I will tell you that is something that you want to identify with your pilots and for your specific aircraft, what that proper crash position is. It's good to have one hand on your primary egress. So if you're sitting in a forward-facing seat and your primary egress is to the right, have your hand on that handle so you have a reference point so that you don't get disoriented once you are in the water and you are upside down. And then your other hand should go on your seatbelt or on your buckle somewhere close by. So, excuse me, so that once the motion is stopped, the aircraft is rolled over, you can get yourself out of your buckle and you know where your primary egress is. Okay. The next thing I want to mention about that is because of the water pressure, you will more than likely not be able to open the doors if they are still intact and if the windows are still intact until the aircraft fills with water. So what you want to do during that initial phase is you've identified your primary egress, your secondary egress. Hopefully you're still in a condition where you are able to get out. You may consider pulling the rubber gasket off of the windows if the door is not going to open. More than likely, the water pressure will push that door in, so just be or push that window in. So just be careful of that. And then as the aircraft fills with water, you should then be able to push that door out or push that window out and be able to egress the window. If you are disoriented as to which direction is up, you can blow some bubbles and follow the bubbles to the surface. And of course, also your body may float, especially if you're wearing a life jacket. All right, when preparing for a crash, make sure your seatbelts are tightened. And again, like I mentioned, identify your primary and secondary egress and placing your hand on the egress handle. Okay, in the event of an emergency landing, the pilot's probably going to be asking for assistance. He's going to be busy flying the aircraft. He may ask you to help him identify a suitable landing zone. If you're flying over a metropolitan area, that's usually not that big of a deal. If you're flying in a rural area like I do, and you're in the mountains, identifying a landing zone might be very important. You may be flying over trees and you have to try and identify a little meadow or some suitable place to land. It's important to try and make a radio call to your dispatch center if possible. If you're flying, if you're using satellite, you want to give them a position report. Most likely they're tracking you, but it may also be part of your emergency action plan to establish communication with them if possible and maintain that communication with them throughout the emergency if possible. Generally, depending on the circumstances, the pilot will immediately start to descend, declare an emergency, and try to communicate with a local tower. Okay. Another in-flight emergency that we've only talked about briefly is the double IMC, or the inadvertent meteorological conditions, and that is a condition where suddenly you're unable to see, or you have icing on the aircraft. You've flown into weather that's inappropriate for continuing the flight. In those circumstances, I think I've mentioned this before, but generally the pilot's going to climb to a safe altitude, maintain a safe airspeed. They're going to contact a tower, declare an emergency, and then get vectors to either clean air or the nearest airport. Just something to touch on, we do talk about this a little bit in the aviation industry, is that your order of importance is aviation, or aviate, navigate, and communicate. The pilot needs to maintain control of the aircraft. Then they need to identify where they are going to fly to or where the hazards are, and then they will try to communicate that to somebody else, whether it be a tower or dispatch center. Okay, so aviation, aviate, navigate, and communicate. Safety of bystanders and patients. This is pretty straightforward. Patients must be secured properly at all times during flight. You want to protect them using hearing, proper hearing protection, whether that be earmuffs or earplugs. Okay, and then in the event of an emergency, making sure that their seatbelts are secure and that you're able to get them out of the aircraft in the event of a hard landing. As far as bystanders around the aircraft, escorting EMS around the aircraft, you always want to make sure that you're escorting any crew or any scene crew around the aircraft. They don't necessarily know where the safe zones are, especially if you are doing a hot load. So just maintaining positive control of the individuals that are helping you around the aircraft. Generally speaking, if I have an EMS crew or a fire crew that's helping me bring a patient into the aircraft, what I will do is I will brief them before we approach the aircraft. I'll let them know, follow behind me, go step where I step, walk where I walk. And that way they know that, they're just going to follow right behind me. There's no question. And then I'll escort them under the rotor system. We'll load the patient, and then I will tell them, stay right here, get the patient loaded, and then when everything is safe, then I will walk out from underneath the rotor disc with them. I don't want them walking off in random directions. I want them staying right with me so that I know that they're not walking towards the tail. They're not approaching an unsafe area. And then that way I can also communicate with the pilot, hey, I've got 3 people that are coming underneath the rotor system with me, and I've got 3 people that I've escorted away, and I know everybody is safe. Okay, we're wrapping this up. Like I mentioned, EMS should not approach the aircraft without instructions from the flight crew. And then you don't want to say EMS, fire EMS, whomever. If somebody is bringing you a patient, it does happen fairly regularly, actually, even if you're landing at a helipad at a hospital where security may come out to bring you a stretcher, and they will start to approach the aircraft while the rotor system is still turning. And what you want to do is just tell them stop, wait, and wait for the rotor system to stop entirely. Or if you're doing a hot load system and you're working with an ambulance crew that they've worked around the aircraft a lot, you've trained with them, you don't want them to approach until you've communicated with the pilot, hey, they're going to bring the patient out, and then as the crew member you can signal for them to come in, but you want to make sure that nobody's approaching the aircraft without the crew member's instructions. I think we've already talked about flying debris and wetting down the LZ previously when we went over LZs and then FOD walk. I think that's it for this category. Safety is completed. The study guide that I posted last week after the broadcast is the same study guide that's there, so it'll be up for another week. If you have already downloaded it, awesome. Thank you very much. If you have not, I encourage you to go over to FlightCrit.com. You can watch the replay of this if you have if you want to watch it again. You can also download the study guide to help you as you prepare for the flight paramedic exam. I'm going to be posting on the blog the study guide as well and I'll include pictures that kind of represent some of the things that we talked about today, as well as some links that I have found that are great for this topic. Next week, wow, I really didn't look ahead to see what we're going to be covering next week, but come on over to facebook.com and join the FlightCrit community. I'll announce what next week's topic is. Also, you can come over to FlightCrit.com, go to the blog, and I will post up there what next week's topic will be as well. And follow me on Twitter at FlightCrit, and on Periscope, you can follow me as well at FlightCrit, and I will be sharing some exclusive tips and tricks with you from from work and from the aircraft. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. If you did, please share this with your friends and coworkers. Spread the word. Come on over and join our mailing list at FlightCrit.com. And I want to thank you again for being a loyal participant in the FlightCrit community. Every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm doing FlightCrit Friday, where we're walking you through each category of the flight paramedic certification exam. Now, if you are a flight nurse or a respiratory therapist, I think a lot of this stuff is still applicable. If you're studying for this critical care paramedic certification exam, again, a lot of this is still applicable, especially from this point going forward. We start getting into some of the more medical-based categories. So thanks so much. Leave me your comments over at FlightCrit.com on the blog or on our Facebook page. Send me a tweet at FlightCrit, and remember, fly safe. Thanks so much. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Friday right here. Talk to you then.